hold up. Stop right there.
What? I'm just trying to get to the escalator.
That bag, let me see it. Receipt doesn't look right.
Are you serious? It's right here. Stapled to the bag. I just paid
Hold
for
on,
this.
stay where you are.
Look at it. My name's right on it. You
Control,
saw me
this
at
is
the
floor
ready.
2. Need assistance at the north escalator.
Unbelievable. Check your cameras then. I'm not stealing anything.
Simone Garrett had just paid $340 for a leather handbag at Belmont and Cross department store. The receipt was stapled to the bag. The transaction had been approved and completed 3 minutes earlier. Store manager Brett Holloway stopped her at the exit and accused her of theft anyway. What Holloway didn't know, the woman he was about to publicly accuse, detain, and humiliate was married to Darius Garrett, chief of police for the city's 840-officer department. The chief whose wife had been shopping while wearing a police family member identification bracelet. The chief who would watch security footage within the hour and see exactly what had been done to his wife. The accusation Holloway made that Saturday afternoon would trigger a civil rights investigation uncovering 127 documented incidents of racial profiling spanning 6 years. It would end with his termination, criminal conviction for false imprisonment, a $2.8 million civil judgment, and forced the parent company to implement nationwide anti-discrimination training affecting 40,000 employees across 180 stores. If you're ready to see how one racist assumption destroyed a career and cost the company millions, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And subscribe to the case study because we're covering another case of authority meeting accountability tomorrow. Let's continue. Simone Garrett was 39 years old. She held a master's degree in social work from Columbia University. For 11 years, she had served as Director of Community Outreach for the Department of Family Services, overseeing programs serving 14,000 families annually. She sat on the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations and had testified before the state legislature on child welfare policy reform. On September 16th, she was shopping at Belmont and Cross, an upscale department store in the city's historic shopping district. She had her eye on a cognac-colored leather handbag displayed in the window for 2 weeks. It was a birthday gift for her sister Talia, who lived in Atlanta and worked in corporate law. Simone had grown up in the city's North Side neighborhood. Her father worked as a machinist for 32 years. Her mother taught elementary school. They instilled in both daughters the importance of education, dignity, and never accepting being treated as less than equal. She had met Darius Garrett at a community policing forum in 2014 when he was a captain running the department's community engagement division. They married in 2016. 5 years later, Darius became the city's first black police chief. The city council vote had been contentious, 5-4, but his record was undeniable. Crime rates down 22% in districts using his community policing models. Use of force incidents down 31%. Community trust surveys up 43 percentage points. Simone wore a discreet silver bracelet on her left wrist engraved with the words, Police Family, badge number 001. It identified her as immediate family of a law enforcement officer. Most officers recognized it on sight. It represented professional courtesy, a connection to the law enforcement community. She entered Belmont and Cross that Saturday afternoon, expecting a simple shopping trip. She would leave 44 minutes later in the back of a police car, not as a suspect, but as the victim of a crime committed against her by the very people supposed to serve customers. Belmont and Cross occupied a historic building downtown. 3 floors of luxury goods, designer clothing, jewelry, accessories, home furnishings. Average item price, $280. The store catered to affluent professionals, established families, and tourists seeking upscale purchases. Brett Holloway had managed the store for 9 years. He was 41 years old, high school graduate with no college degree. He started as a floor sales associate, got promoted to department supervisor after 3 years, and became store manager in 2019. His annual salary was $78,000 plus performance bonuses tied to theft prevention. Holloway had clear ideas about who belonged in his store and who didn't. Security footage would later document everything. Simone entered through the main entrance wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse, dark jeans, and professional flats. Her hair was pulled back. She wore minimal jewelry except her wedding ring and the police family bracelet. She carried a leather tote bag over her shoulder. She walked directly to the accessories department on the second floor, where security cameras captured her examining handbags on display. She selected the cognac-colored leather bag she'd been considering for weeks. She examined the stitching, checked the interior pockets, and looked at the price tag, showing $340. Brett Holloway appeared in the security footage, positioning himself about 15 feet away, partially concealed behind a clothing display. His arms were crossed. He was watching. Simone walked to the register with the handbag. Sales associate Kelly Morrison greeted her and began processing the transaction. Simone presented her American Express card. Morrison swiped it and waited for approval. The transaction was approved. The receipt printed. Morrison placed the handbag in a Belmont and Cross shopping bag with tissue paper and stapled the receipt to the outside per store policy. Simone thanked Morrison, took the shopping bag, and walked toward the escalator. Holloway intercepted her before she reached it. Security camera 9 captured the confrontation from an elevated angle. What neither of them knew, that camera also captured audio. Crystal clear. Every word documented. Holloway told Simone to stop, put the bag down, and step away from the exit. His words were delivered with absolute certainty. Simone's expression showed confusion, not fear. Her voice remained level as she told him she had just paid for the item at the register. Holloway informed her that the store had procedures for suspected theft and that security was on the way. Simone felt something cold settle in her chest. She recognized what was happening. She had counseled families through this exact scenario dozens of times in her work. The assumption, the accusation, the public humiliation designed to force compliance through embarrassment. She had never imagined experiencing it herself. She maintained her calm, professional tone and explained that she wasn't stealing anything. She had purchased the bag 3 minutes earlier. The receipt was stapled to the bag. He could verify the transaction at the register. Holloway's tone hardened. He told her he would verify it after security processed her, claiming store policy required detention of suspected shoplifters until police arrived. His use of the words suspected shoplifters was loud enough that nearby customers turned to look. Faces registering shock, curiosity, judgment. A black woman being accused of theft in an upscale store. The assumption was implicit in every stare. Simone noticed 3 things simultaneously. First, her receipt was clearly visible, stapled to the outside of the shopping bag per store protocol. Holloway hadn't asked to see it, hadn't requested verification, had jumped directly to detention. Second, 2 other customers had exited past Holloway in the previous 60 seconds, both carrying Belmont and Cross shopping bags, both white. Neither had been stopped or questioned. Third, Holloway's hand was hovering near his radio, ready to call for additional security. His body language was aggressive, confrontational, expecting resistance. She made a decision. She would comply completely, document everything, and let the system expose itself. She told him she wasn't resisting and asked him to verify the receipt that was attached to the bag before escalating the situation. Holloway keyed his radio instead, calling for security to respond to the accessories department for a suspected shoplifter. Within 90 seconds, 2 security officers arrived, both white males in their mid-30s wearing Belmont and Cross security uniforms. Their name tags identified them as J. Morrison and D. Kelso. Holloway briefed them quickly. His voice was low but still audible on the security recording. He claimed he had seen her acting suspicious near the handbag display, watched her conceal merchandise, and said she was claiming she paid, but he hadn't seen any transaction. Every word was a lie. Security footage showed he had watched her complete the transaction, had seen the receipt printed, had observed the bag being placed in store wrapping. Officer Morrison told Simone they needed to verify her purchase and asked her to come with them to the security office. The phrasing was polite. The implication was clear. Refuse, and this becomes a police matter. Simone understood the trap perfectly. Refuse, and she's resisting. Comply, and she's submitting to illegal detention. Either way, the humiliation was public, the accusation was made, and her reputation was being damaged with every second while customers watched. She noticed one customer recording the confrontation on a phone. Good. More documentation. She spoke clearly, ensuring her words would be captured by both security cameras and the customer's recording. She stated she was not resisting, but wanted it noted she was complying under protest. She had paid for the merchandise. The receipt was attached to the bag. This was racial profiling, and she would be filing a formal complaint. Holloway's face flushed red. He insisted this had nothing to do with race, and that they detained all suspected thieves regardless of their background. Simone interrupted with her voice still calm, but carrying absolute authority. She pointed out that he had watched her complete the transaction, watched the receipt print, and saw the bag being wrapped. She had observed 2 white customers exit past him with shopping bags in the last 2 minutes, and neither was stopped. This was textbook racial profiling, and it was being recorded by multiple cameras right now. The security officers exchanged glances. Morrison's expression suggested he was reconsidering whether this was worth it. But Holloway doubled down and ordered them to escort her to the security office immediately. The security office was on the 3rd floor, accessed through a door marked staff only. It was a small, windowless room containing a desk, 3 chairs, and a wall of monitor screens showing security camera feed from throughout the store. Simone was placed in a chair facing the desk. Morrison stood near the door. Kelso remained in the hallway. Holloway sat behind the desk, pulling up transaction records on the computer. 11 minutes had passed since Simone had paid for the handbag. Holloway's expression as he reviewed the computer screen cycled through confusion, realization, and something approaching panic. Transaction ID 8473392. Timestamp showed 2:54 p.m. Item. Handbag. Amount, $340. Payment. American Express, ending in 4891. Status. Approved. The receipt matched perfectly. The transaction was legitimate. The accusation was baseless. A competent manager would have apologized immediately, acknowledged the mistake, and ended the detention. Holloway chose differently. He told Simone the transaction showed approved, but they still needed to verify the card wasn't stolen. He asked for her name. She told him her name was Simone Garrett. The card was hers. The purchase was legitimate, and he was now detaining her illegally after confirming she hadn't committed any crime. Holloway picked up the store phone and said he was calling the police to verify her identity. Simone allowed herself the smallest smile. The first crack in her composure, it wasn't fear or anger. It was the grim satisfaction of watching someone tighten the noose around their own neck. She told him to please do so. Holloway dialed 911. He identified himself as the manager at Belmont and Cross and told the dispatcher he needed an officer to respond for suspected credit card fraud. He claimed they had detained a customer who may be using a stolen card. The dispatcher asked if the individual was threatening violence or attempting to leave. Holloway said no. She was cooperative, but they needed verification. Officers would respond with an estimated arrival time of 12 minutes. Holloway hung up the phone with evident satisfaction and told Simone the officers were on the way and she could wait there. Simone asked to make a phone call. Holloway refused, stating no phone calls until police arrived and verified her identity. That statement would later be cited specifically in the false imprisonment charges. Denying someone the ability to contact anyone, including legal counsel, during an illegal detention elevated the violation from civil to criminal. Simone didn't argue. She sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap and waited. What Holloway didn't know, Simone's phone in her tote bag had been on an active call since the moment Holloway first stopped her at the escalator. She had activated voice-to-text emergency contact when Holloway first approached, following a safety protocol Darius had taught her years earlier. One touch on the phone in her bag had opened a line to Darius's direct office number and began recording and transcribing everything. Darius Garrett, chief of police, had been listening to his wife's detention in real time for the last 15 minutes. At police headquarters, 2.3 miles from Belmont and Cross, Darius Garrett sat at his desk with his phone on speaker, listening to every word. He had heard the confrontation, had heard the accusation, had heard his wife's calm, measured responses, had heard Holloway doubling down even after confirming the transaction was legitimate. He recognized immediately what this was: racial profiling, illegal detention, and now false imprisonment. Everything documented, everything recorded. He also recognized something else. Responding as the chief of police would complicate the legal case. His presence could be framed as using his position to intimidate. Better to let the system play out exactly as it would for any citizen than bring institutional weight down afterward. But he could ensure the responding officers handled this correctly. He contacted dispatch and asked which units were responding to the call at Belmont and Cross. Dispatch informed him units 347 and 351 were en route with an estimated arrival time of 8 minutes. Darius asked to be patched through to Unit 347. Officer Reyna responded. Darius knew him. 8-year veteran with good instincts and a professional demeanor. Darius explained the situation carefully. The call Reyna was responding to involved Darius's wife. She was the detained individual. The store manager had accused her of theft after she completed a legitimate transaction. Darius had been listening on an open line. The detention was illegal and had escalated to false imprisonment. There was a pause as Reyna processed the information and understood the implications. He asked how Darius wanted them to proceed. Darius's instruction was deliberate and specific. Proceed exactly as they would for any civilian complaint of illegal detention. Document everything. If the store manager had detained someone after verifying they committed no crime, that was false imprisonment. If he had denied her ability to leave or contact anyone, that was criminal. Treat this as any other case. By the book. And Darius wanted body cameras activated the moment they entered the store. Reyna confirmed he understood and that body cameras would be active. The radio went silent. Darius sat back in his chair. His hands were shaking slightly. Anger, fear, and cold calculation mixing in equal measure. His wife had been publicly humiliated, illegally detained, and denied her rights. All because a store manager looked at a black woman in his store and made assumptions. The system would now respond with precision. Officers Reyna and Torres entered Belmont and crossed 20 minutes after Holloway's 911 call. Their body cameras were activated. Every subsequent action would be documented in high definition. Store staff directed them to the third-floor security office. Reyna knocked twice, then entered. Simone was sitting calmly in a chair. Morrison stood near the door. Holloway sat behind the desk, looking relieved at the officer's arrival. Reyna identified himself and Torres, then asked about the suspected credit card fraud call. Holloway stood and gestured towards Simone. He explained that she had attempted to leave the store with merchandise. They detained her and verified she had completed a transaction, but he claimed they needed police to confirm her identity and that the credit card wasn't stolen. Reyna asked a pointed question. Had Holloway detained her after verifying the transaction was completed and approved? Holloway hesitated, recognizing the trap in the question. He said they needed to verify the card wasn't stolen. Reyna turned to Simone and asked for her version of events. Simone's recounting was precise, chronological, and devastating. She described purchasing the handbag, completing the transaction, being stopped before reaching the exit, being accused of theft despite the visible receipt, being denied the opportunity to simply show the receipt, being escorted to the security office, having the transaction verified as legitimate, being told she still couldn't leave, being denied the ability to make a phone call, and being held for over 20 minutes after the store confirmed she had committed no crime. Then she reached in her tote bag and removed her phone. The screen showed an active call to Darius's office. The timer showed the call had been running for over 25 minutes. She explained that she had activated an emergency call to her husband when she was first detained. He had been listening to everything. Her husband was Darius Garrett, chief of police. The color drained from Holloway's face. Reyna's expression didn't change, but Torres's eyes widened slightly. Reyna explained that Chief Garrett had contacted them before they responded and instructed them to handle this exactly as they would any complaint of illegal detention. He turned back to Holloway with another pointed question. Holloway had acknowledged that he detained Simone after verifying her transaction was legitimate. Had she at any point attempted to leave? Holloway stated she wasn't free to leave until they completed their investigation. Reyna pressed further. What investigation? They had confirmed the transaction. They had confirmed the receipt. What additional investigation was required? Holloway had no answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. Reyna's tone shifted to official notification. Detaining someone against their will without legal justification constituted false imprisonment under state law. Holloway had acknowledged holding her after confirming no crime occurred. The officers would need to file a report, and criminal charges might be filed. Simone was released 22 minutes after her initial detention. Body camera footage captured her exiting the security office with officers Reyna and Torres. Holloway remained in the office facing questions about store detention policies, his training on when detention was legally justified, and whether he had ever detained other customers under similar circumstances. His answers would later be used as evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings. Simone walked through the store to the main exit. Customers who had witnessed the confrontation earlier watched her leave, escorted by police officers. The optics looked like a black woman being removed by police after being accused of theft. What they didn't see, the officers weren't arresting her. They were documenting her unlawful detention. On the sidewalk outside, Officer Reyna handed Simone a case number for the police report. He explained that everything had been documented. The body camera footage clearly showed the illegal detention. The chief had asked that they ensure she was treated exactly as any other citizen would be in this situation. She had grounds for both criminal complaints and civil action. Simone thanked them. Her composure finally cracked slightly, and her hands trembled as she took the case number card. She walked 3 blocks to where Darius was waiting in an unmarked police vehicle. He had left headquarters the moment he knew officers were on scene. When she opened the passenger door, the careful control she'd maintained for the past hour collapsed. Darius pulled her into an embrace while she cried. Not from fear or trauma, but from exhaustion and anger at the indignity of being treated as a criminal in a store where she'd spent thousands of dollars over the years. After a few minutes, she composed herself and told him something important. She wanted to press charges. All of them. And she wanted to file a civil suit. Not for the money. For the record. So there would be documentation that this happened, that it was wrong, and that there were consequences. Darius acknowledged her decision, but warned her that once they filed, this would become public. She would be named. The story would be news. People would have opinions. It wouldn't be easy. Her response was immediate and unwavering. She had spent years counseling families through situations like this, telling them to document, to report, to trust the system. She couldn't do that work if she didn't trust the system enough to use it herself. They were filing. That decision, made in a car 3 blocks from Belmont and Cross, would set off a chain of events that would cost Brett Holloway his career, his freedom, and his reputation. Within 24 hours, 3 separate investigations were underway. The first investigation was criminal. Detective Sarah Kim was assigned the false imprisonment case. She reviewed security footage, body camera recordings, witness statements, and Simone's phone records showing the call to Darius that had captured audio of the entire detention. The evidence was overwhelming. Holloway had detained Simone after confirming she had committed no crime. He had denied her ability to leave. He had denied her ability to make a phone call. He had made statements suggesting the detention was based on suspicion despite having verified the transaction. Kim's report recommended criminal charges. False imprisonment, a misdemeanor carrying up to 1 year in jail and $5,000 in fines. The second investigation was corporate. Belmont and Cross's parent company, Meridian Retail Group, launched an internal investigation within 48 hours. Their legal department recognized immediately that a high-profile racial profiling case could cost them millions. They requested all security footage from September 16th, personnel files for Holloway and the security staff, and records of all customer detentions over the previous 12 months. What they found was damning. The third investigation was civil. Simone retained the law firm of Henderson and Associates, a boutique firm specializing in civil rights litigation. Senior partner Diane Henderson had won $4.7 million in settlements over her 18-year career representing victims of racial discrimination. Henderson's team immediately filed Freedom of Information requests for all Belmont and Cross detention records, security footage, and internal communications. They were building a case that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The discovery process over the following 3 months uncovered systematic racial profiling that had operated for 6 years. Security footage analysis identified 127 separate incidents where customers had been stopped, questioned, detained, or followed by store security or management between 2018 and 2024. The demographics breakdown was stark. 94 incidents involved Black customers, representing 74% of all detentions. 18 incidents involved Hispanic customers at 14%. 12 incidents involved Middle Eastern customers at 9%. Only 3 incidents involved white customers, just 2% of the total. The city's actual demographics told a different story. The population was 52% white, 28% Black, 14% Hispanic, and 6% other ethnicities. Statistical analysis showed that Black customers were detained at a rate 11 times higher than their representation in the customer base. The probability of this occurring without intentional discrimination was calculated at less than 0.001%, essentially mathematically impossible without deliberate racial targeting. Of the 127 documented detention incidents, 89 resulted in no charges because the customers had paid for their items or were actively shopping. Another 12 resulted in charges that were later dropped. Only 26 incidents resulted in actual convictions for theft. That meant 101 customers, representing 79% of all detentions, had been stopped, questioned, or detained despite committing absolutely no crime. Internal emails uncovered during discovery revealed explicit racial bias in security training and operations. One email from Brett Holloway to security staff in March 2021 instructed them to keep extra attention on customers who didn't fit the usual profile. He wrote that they would know what he meant and to trust their gut. Another email exchange from August 2022 showed a security supervisor informing Holloway that Officer Morrison had let a Black customer walk out with a jacket. The supervisor noted it was paid for, but suggested they should have verified first anyway. Holloway's response was revealing. He wrote that it was better to question and verify than let them walk. He stated that worst case the customer gets annoyed, best case they stop theft. The underlying assumption was clear. Better to harass innocent customers than risk missing actual theft, and the customers most likely to be harassed were Black. The paper trail was extensive. The pattern was undeniable. The discrimination was institutional, not isolated to one manager's actions. Henderson and Associates filed an amended complaint expanding beyond just false imprisonment. The new claims included systematic racial discrimination, violation of civil rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent retention of employees with known discriminatory practices. The requested damages were set at $2.8 million. The civil trial began 11 months after the September incident. It was held in federal court with Judge Patricia Mendez presiding. Meridian Retail Group's initial legal strategy was to settle quickly. They offered Simone $350,000 in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement that would seal the case from public view and prevent the company from admitting any fault. Simone refused the offer. She wanted a public trial, public documentation, and public accountability. The case would proceed. The trial lasted 6 days, and the evidence presented was devastating. Days 1 and 2 focused on evidence presentation. Security footage played on screens throughout the courtroom. The jury watched Simone complete her transaction at the register. They watched Holloway intercept her at the escalator. They watched the confrontation unfold with Simone maintaining her composure while Holloway's aggression escalated. They watched her being escorted to the security office. Body camera footage from Officers Reyna and Torres showed Holloway admitting on camera that he had detained Simone after verifying her transaction was legitimate. Audio recordings from Simone's phone call to Darius captured every word of the confrontation and detention with crystal clarity. Days 3 and 4 presented the pattern evidence. Henderson's team laid out the statistical analysis of 127 detention incidents documented over 6 years. Expert testimony came from Dr. Robert Shun, a sociology professor specializing in racial bias research. Dr. Chun explained to the jury that the disparity in detention rates was mathematically impossible without intentional discrimination. The numbers were too extreme to be explained by chance or unconscious bias. This was deliberate targeting. Former employees testified about Holloway's training methods. They described his trust your gut instructions and his explicit directions to watch certain customers more closely based on appearance. Several former security officers admitted they had been uncomfortable with the racial profiling but feared losing their jobs if they objected. Internal emails were read aloud in court, revealing the institutional nature of the discrimination. The jury heard Holloway's own words instructing staff to profile customers who didn't fit the usual profile. They heard supervisors reinforcing these discriminatory practices. They heard management celebrating detention numbers without questioning whether those detentions were justified. Day 5 featured Simone's testimony. She took the stand and described the incident with precise, devastating detail. She explained the humiliation of being publicly accused of theft while holding a receipt. She described the violation of being detained illegally after the store had confirmed her innocence. She testified about the indignity of being denied basic rights, like making a phone call or simply leaving with her purchased merchandise. She also testified about the lasting impact. She described developing anxiety when shopping in any store. She explained the hypervigilance she now felt, constantly aware of whether security was watching her. She talked about the trauma of being treated as a criminal despite having committed no crime, and how that feeling of violation persisted months after the incident. Under cross-examination, Meridian's attorney attempted to suggest Simone had been argumentative or uncooperative during the detention. Henderson objected immediately, and Judge Mendez sustained the objection. The body camera footage had already shown clearly that Simone had cooperated completely while asserting her rights. There was no basis for suggesting otherwise. Day 6 brought the verdict. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning to the courtroom. They returned findings for the plaintiff, Simone Garrett, on every single count. False imprisonment, the company was liable. Racial discrimination, the company was liable. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, the company was liable. Negligent retention of employees with known discriminatory practices, the company was liable. The damages awarded reflected both compensation and punishment. The jury awarded $300,000 in compensatory damages for Simone's emotional distress, public humiliation, and violation of her civil rights. They awarded an additional $2.5 million in punitive damages specifically designed to punish Meridian Retail Group and deter future discrimination. The total judgment was $2.8 million. The jury foreman later told reporters that the evidence had made their decision straightforward. This wasn't one manager making one mistake. This was a company that knew they had a systemic problem and did nothing to fix it. The pattern was too clear, the evidence too overwhelming, and the harm too significant to warrant anything less than maximum accountability. The civil verdict triggered cascading consequences across multiple levels of the organization and beyond. For Brett Holloway, the consequences were swift and severe. Criminal charges proceeded on a separate track from the civil case. He was convicted of false imprisonment and sentenced to 180 days in county jail. He served 90 days with good behavior credit. After his release, he faced 3 years of probation and mandatory community service with organizations serving minority communities. His employment at Belmont and Cross was terminated immediately after the civil verdict. No other retail company would hire him for management positions once his case became public. He filed for bankruptcy protection within 6 months. The judgment combined with his legal fees destroyed his finances completely. His career in retail management was over. His reputation was permanently damaged. His assumption that he could profile customers without consequence had been proven catastrophically wrong. For Belmont and Cross and its parent company Meridian Retail Group, the financial and operational consequences extended far beyond the $2.8 million judgment. The judgment was paid in full within 30 days, as required by the court. But the real cost was much higher. The company was forced to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all employees across their 180 stores nationwide. The program cost $4.2 million annually and required ongoing updates and monitoring. New detention policies were instituted that prohibited stopping any customer unless theft was directly observed by at least 2 staff members and captured clearly on security footage. Even then, managers had to document their reasonable suspicion before any detention could occur. A corporate oversight division was created specifically to review all detention incidents monthly and audit for racial disparities. This division had the authority to terminate managers who showed patterns of discriminatory enforcement. During the first year of operation, 10 additional employees, including 3 store managers, were terminated after internal review uncovered documented bias incidents. The reputational damage was significant. News coverage of the case was extensive. Social media campaigns called for boycotts. The company's brand was associated with racial profiling for months. Customer surveys showed a measurable decline in trust, particularly among minority shoppers. Recovery would take years. For the broader community, the case became a crucial teaching moment. Local civil rights organizations used the Garrett case as a prime example of why documentation matters, why reporting matters, and why using the legal system matters even when it feels intimidating or futile. Simone spoke at community forums and church gatherings about the importance of knowing your rights and demanding accountability. She emphasized that she had every advantage in this situation. She was educated, professionally connected, married to the police chief, and had resources to hire excellent lawyers. Yet even with all those advantages, the system had still tried to dismiss and minimize what happened to her. She stressed that people without those advantages faced even greater barriers and deserved even more support. She made a decision about the settlement money that surprised many people. She donated $1.8 million of the $2.8 million award to 3 organizations fighting for civil rights and justice reform. $800,000 went to the Legal Defense Fund that handled civil rights litigation for people who couldn't afford private attorneys. $600,000 went to the Community Justice Project that provided free legal services to low-income residents facing discrimination. $400,000 went to youth education programs teaching civic rights and responsibilities so the next generation would grow up knowing how to protect themselves and demand accountability. She kept $1 million for her family. Part of it went to establishing a college fund for her goddaughter and nieces. Part of it went toward replacing the sense of emotional security she had lost, knowing she now had resources to fight back if anything similar ever happened again. For the legal system and civil rights community, the case established important precedent. The Garrett versus Meridian decision became template for proving systemic discrimination in other retail discrimination cases. The statistical analysis methodology that Henderson's team had used became a model for other attorneys building similar cases. Within 18 months of the Garrett verdict, 4 additional lawsuits were filed against other retail chains in the state, each citing the Garrett case as precedent. 3 of those cases settled for undisclosed amounts before trial. The 4th went to trial and resulted in a $1.2 million verdict for the plaintiff. The case forced retailers across the region to examine their own detention practices and statistics. Several major chains proactively revised their policies and implemented bias training programs specifically to avoid becoming the next headline. The threat of Garrett-style litigation created pressure for systemic change across the entire retail industry. 2 years after the September incident at Belmont and Cross, Simone Garrett stood in the state legislature chambers testifying in favor of proposed legislation called the Retail Accountability Act. The bill would require all retail stores over a certain size to track and publicly report detention demographics quarterly. The data would be analyzed by an independent state commission that could investigate stores showing statistical patterns of racial profiling. Stores found to have discriminatory practices would face fines, mandatory training requirements, and potential loss of business licenses for repeat violations. Simone's testimony was powerful and personal. She described her own experience in detail. She explained how the data analysis in her case had revealed that her detention wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a 6-year pattern affecting over 100 innocent customers. She argued that sunlight was the best disinfectant, and requiring public reporting would force stores to confront their own biases and create accountability before litigation became necessary. The bill passed the state legislature 5 months later with bipartisan support. It was signed into law and took effect the following January. Simone attended the signing ceremony, where the governor specifically thanked her for her courage in demanding accountability and using her experience to create lasting change. She was no longer just a victim of discrimination. She had become an advocate for systemic reform. Her advocacy work became a significant part of her professional identity alongside her role at the Department of Family Services. Brett Holloway, meanwhile, worked night shifts as a stock clerk at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. His days in retail management were over. His career was destroyed. His reputation was permanently tarnished. His finances were ruined. His assumption that he could judge people by the color of their skin and face no consequences had been proven catastrophically, publicly, and permanently wrong. The contrast between their outcomes was stark and deliberate. Simone had been victimized, but she refused to be defined by that victimization. She had demanded justice, received it, and used it to protect others. Holloway had held power, abused it, and lost everything. Sometimes karma isn't just about one person getting justice for themselves. Sometimes it's about one person having the courage to demand accountability, and in doing so, creating change that protects thousands of others who come after them. Sometimes it's about transforming personal trauma into systemic reform. Sometimes it's about proving that documentation, persistence, and belief in accountability can actually work, even against institutional power. The $2.8 million judgment sent a message that resonated far beyond one store or one manager. It told retail corporations across the country that racial profiling carried real financial consequences. It told employees who witnessed discrimination that speaking up mattered. It told victims of profiling that the system, despite its flaws, could sometimes deliver justice. And it told people like Brett Holloway that their prejudices and assumptions had a price, and that price could be everything. Do you think the $2.8 million judgment was justified? Drop yes or no in the comments, and tell me why you think that. And hit that share button, because stories like this need to be seen by as many people as possible. If you enjoyed this case from the Case Study Cinema, make sure you hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next case. We're covering another story of authority meeting accountability dropping soon. Share this video with someone who needs to see it, and drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you most in this case. Until next time, remember that actions have consequences, documentation is power, and demanding accountability isn't just about personal justice. It's about creating change that protects everyone who comes after you. I'll see you in the next case.